She paid for luxury, but was served a nightmare at 30,000 feet. A black woman in first class, her very presence deemed suspicious by the flight attendant entrusted with her safety. But what this attendant didn't know was that the woman she was targeting held the power to ground her career, her airline, and spark a reckoning throughout the entire aviation industry. This isn't just a story of prejudice. It's a story of power deception, and the day karma booked a one-way ticket to justice. Buckle up, because this flight gets turbulent. The sterile, recycled air of the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, ATL, hummed with the usual Monday morning symphony of rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, and garbled gate announcements. Dr. Evelyn Hayes, however, moved with a calm, unhurried grace that seemed to create a small pocket of serenity around her. Dressed in a sharply tailored navy pantsuit, her locks styled in an elegant upsweep, she carried a well-loved leather briefcase that held not just her essentials, but the weight of her new, yet-to-be-publicly announced responsibilities. Just 3 days prior, Evelyn had accepted the presidential nomination to become the next director of the Federal Aviation Administration. The official announcement was slated for Wednesday, after this brief trip to San Francisco for a final discreet meeting with outgoing officials and to secure a new apartment. For now, she was just another traveler, albeit one who appreciated the legroom and quietude that first class afforded, a small necessary luxury for the demanding work that lay ahead. She approached Gate C-33, where Aero Wing Flight 372 to San Francisco was already in the advanced stages of boarding. The first-class line was short, and Evelyn presented her boarding pass, digital on her phone, to the gate agent, who offered a polite if perfunctory smile and waved her through. Stepping onto the aircraft, she was met by the scent of coffee and the low murmur of settled passengers. She turned left into the first-class cabin, a relatively new Airbus A321neo, its seats upholstered in cream leather, each a self-contained pod of comfort. Her seat 2A was a window seat, just as she preferred. As she paused to stow her carry-on roller bag in the overhead compartment, a voice sharp and laced with an almost accusatory tone cut through the cabin's quiet ambiance. "Ma'am, can I help you?" Evelyn turned. Standing before her was a flight attendant, blonde in her late 40s perhaps, with a name tag that read Karen. Her smile was tight, a mere upward twitch of the lips that didn't reach her eyes, which were currently scanning Evelyn from head to toe with an unnerving intensity. "Good morning, Evelyn," replied her voice, even and warm. "Just getting settled. I'm in 2A. Karen's eyes flicked to the seat, then back to Evelyn, lingering for a moment on her face, her attire, and then quite obviously her skin. "Right," Karen said the word drawn out. "Sometimes passengers get a little turned around. Economy is to the right and further back." She gestured vaguely over her shoulder, the implication hanging heavy in the air. Evelyn felt a familiar, weary sigh try to escape her, but she suppressed it. She'd encountered this before, this subtle and sometimes not so subtle questioning of her presence in spaces where some felt she didn't belong. "I'm quite sure this is my seat," Evelyn said, offering a polite smile. "My boarding pass confirms it. Window seat just how I like it." Karen's smile tightened further. "Of course, just making sure. We've had issues with people trying to, shall we say, self-upgrade recently. It causes a lot of unnecessary disruption." The accusation, though veiled, was clear. Evelyn's internal temperature rose a notch, but her expression remained composed. "I can assure you my ticket is for this cabin. Would you like to see my boarding pass again?" No, Karen said, waving a dismissive hand. though her eyes still held a skeptical glint. "As long as you're sure." She then proceeded to fuss with a pillow on the empty seat across the aisle 2B, pointedly ignoring Evelyn's attempt to finish stowing her roller bag. Evelyn, with a practiced ease born of countless similar encounters, lifted her bag smoothly into the compartment and closed it with a soft click. She then retrieved her briefcase from where she'd momentarily placed it on her seat, preparing to sit down. "That's a rather large briefcase for a personal item, isn't it?" Karen interjected, her voice still carrying that edge. "Overhead bin space is at a premium in first, you know. We try to keep the underseat area clear for comfort." Evelyn looked at her briefcase, then at the generous space beneath the seat in front of her. It would fit with room to spare. It's FAA-approved carry-on size and contains sensitive documents. It will fit perfectly under my seat as per regulations for items containing such materials. She didn't need to explain the contents, but the slight emphasis on FAA-approved was a small private satisfaction. Karen's eyebrows rose. Sensitive documents. My. Aren't we important? The sarcasm was unmistakable now, no longer even thinly veiled. Before Evelyn could respond, a younger flight attendant, David, appeared at Karen's elbow. He had a kind, slightly nervous face. "Karen. Captain Miller needs to see the final passenger manifest printout. And Mrs. Henderson in 3D is asking for a pre-departure orange juice." Karen shot David an irritated look, as if his interruption was a personal affront. "I'm dealing with a situation. Here, David, can't you see?" She flicked her eyes towards Evelyn again. David glanced at Evelyn, a flicker of unease in his eyes, then back at Karen. "Oh, is there a problem with this passenger's seating?" Karen Evelyn decided to take the initiative. "There's no problem at all from my end," she said, her voice calm but firm. Meeting David's gaze before turning back to Karen. "I'm simply trying to take my assigned seat, 2A. Karen huffed. "Fine, but I'll be keeping an eye on things." She gave Evelyn one last suspicious glare before turning on her heel and heading towards the galley, presumably to fetch the manifest, her movements stiff with indignation. David offered Evelyn an apologetic grimace. "Sorry about that, ma'am. Please make yourself comfortable." He then hurried off to attend to Mrs. Henderson. Evelyn finally sank into seat 2A. The plush leather felt welcoming, a stark contrast to the decidedly unwelcoming reception she'd just received. She gazed out the window at the bustling activity on the tarmac, the ground crew scurrying like ants, the massive jets gliding in and out with surprising grace. This was her world now, the world of aviation, not just as a passenger, but as its chief regulator. And it seemed her first unofficial duty was to navigate the turbulent skies of prejudice within the very cabin of an aircraft. She took a slow, deliberate breath, centering herself. This wasn't the first time she'd been profiled, and sadly, she knew it wouldn't be the last. But today felt different. The irony was almost palpable. The woman deemed suspicious for occupying a first-class seat was in a matter of days going to be responsible for the safety, security, and fairness of the entire American aviation system. A faint, humorless smile touched her lips. Karen had no idea. No idea at all. But Evelyn had a growing suspicion that this flight was going to be anything but routine. The drama, it seemed, had already begun its ascent. As other first-class passengers settled, Evelyn observed Karen interacting with them. With the white elderly couple in 1A and 1B, she was all smiles and solicitous charm. With the businessman in 3C engrossed in his laptop, she was efficiently polite. but every time Karen's gaze swept past Evelyn, that familiar glint of suspicion returned a silent, persistent accusation. The cabin door was soon closed. The safety briefing commenced, David delivering it with a professional if slightly strained demeanor, while Karen stood near the front, her arms crossed, occasionally darting looks towards Evelyn. It was subtle, but to Evelyn, who was hyper-aware of such scrutiny, it felt like a spotlight. The aircraft pushed back from the gate, the engines whining to life. As they taxied towards the runway, Evelyn tried to focus on the pre-reading materials for her San Francisco meetings. But Karen's initial hostility had cast a pall over her usual pre-flight concentration. Just before takeoff, Karen made her rounds for pre-departure drink orders. When she reached Evelyn, her saccharine smile was back, but it was a brittle facade. "And for you, ma'am, perhaps some water or coffee." There was an almost imperceptible pause before coffee, a slight emphasis that in the context of everything else felt loaded. Evelyn, who had been about to ask for her usual sparkling water with lime, felt a sudden wave of defiance. "I'll have a glass of your finest champagne, please," she said, her voice smooth as silk, meeting Karen's gaze directly. Karen's smile faltered for a split second, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly before she regained her composure. "Certainly, ma'am. Right away." She spun on her heel and marched back to the galley. Evelyn watched her go, a small, determined knot tightening in her stomach. This wasn't just about a rude flight attendant anymore. This was about dignity, about respect, about challenging the ingrained biases that made a black woman in first class an automatic object of suspicion. The new FAA director was on board, and class was officially in session. The lesson, however, was shaping up to be a difficult one for some. The plane rumbled down the runway, gathering speed, and then with a powerful surge lifted into the Atlanta sky, banking gracefully towards the west. Evelyn looked out the window, her reflection staring back. A black woman, confident, accomplished, and now apparently a suspicious element, at 30,000 feet. The journey had just begun in more ways than one. And Karen, she suspected, was about to learn that some passengers carry more weight than just their luggage. The pop of the champagne cork from the galley was barely audible over the roar of the engines as Aero Wing Flight 372 climbed to its cruising altitude. But for Evelyn Hayes, it felt like a small, defiant punctuation mark. When Karen returned with the flute of champagne, her smile was plastered on a rictus of forced civility. She placed it on Evelyn's tray table with a little more force than necessary, the bubbles fizzing aggressively. "Your champagne," Karen said, her voice as crisp as the sotched collar of her uniform. "Thank you," Evelyn replied, her tone even taking a moment to admire the pale gold liquid before picking up the flute. She met Karen's gaze, holding it for a beat longer than comfortable. "It looks lovely." Karen simply nodded curtly and moved on her back ramrod straight. Evelyn took a slow sip. It wasn't just about the drink. It was about refusing to be diminished, refusing to alter her perfectly reasonable desires to fit someone else's prejudiced expectations. As the flight settled into its rhythm, the microaggressions continued a steady drizzle of disrespect. When Karen took meal orders, she elaborated on the choices for every other first-class passenger, offering recommendations and warm descriptions. For Evelyn, it was a clipped chicken or pasta. "Could you tell me a little more about the pasta, please?" Evelyn asked, her voice polite. Karen sighed a theatrical exhalation of impatience. "It's pasta, with a red sauce, and some vegetables, I think." She didn't make eye contact, instead, looking somewhere over Evelyn's head. "And the chicken," Evelyn pressed, maintaining her calm. "Roasted," Comes with potatoes." Her tone implied Evelyn was being deliberately obtuse. "I'll try the chicken." "Thank you," Evelyn said. When the meal was served, Evelyn's tray was delivered last, after Karen had double-checked on everyone else, refilled their drinks and offered extra bread rolls. The chicken was predictably a little dry. She ate what she could, the experience a far cry from the premium service Aerowing touted for its first-class passengers. Later, Evelyn requested a refill of sparkling water. 20 minutes passed. David walked by, and Evelyn politely caught his attention. "Excuse me, David. I asked for some sparkling water a little while ago." David looked flustered. "Oh, I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'll get that for you right away." He returned promptly with the water and a genuine apology. Karen, who was in the galley ostensibly organizing coffee service, shot a brief, venomous look towards David, then towards Evelyn. It was clear she hadn't passed on the request. The passenger in 1B, a portly man in his 60s with a florid face, seemed to find Karen's officiousness rather charming. He'd chuckled when Karen made her self-upgrade comment earlier, and now he engaged her in loud, jovial conversation, every time she passed, praising the airline and her attentiveness. "You run a tight ship, young lady," he boomed. "Good to see such professionalism." Evelyn noted the irony. Karen's professionalism seemed to be highly selective. Across the aisle, a woman in 2D, who had a kind face and had offered Evelyn a small, sympathetic smile earlier, when Karen was being particularly dismissive, now looked increasingly uncomfortable. She'd ordered the pasta and had discreetly picked at it, her expression one of mild disappointment. She caught Evelyn's eye briefly and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, as if to say, "You're not imagining this." Evelyn decided to get some work done. She retrieved her laptop from her briefcase, careful to ensure the screen wasn't easily visible to her neighbors. She had several sensitive FAA briefing documents to review. As she typed, she was aware of Karen making more frequent passes down the aisle than seemed strictly necessary, her eyes flicking towards Evelyn's screen each time. On one such pass, Karen paused. "Ma'am, for security reasons, we ask that passengers be mindful of any sensitive information displayed on their laptops, especially in such an open cabin." Evelyn looked up, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "I'm well aware of that. Thank you. I'm taking all necessary precautions." The privacy filter on her screen, while not impenetrable, made casual snooping difficult. "Just a reminder," Karen said, her lips pursed. "We wouldn't want any company secrets getting out." Again, the subtle sarcastic emphasis. "Nor would I," Evelyn replied, her voice dangerously quiet. She made a small, almost invisible note on the pad beside her laptop. A date, a time, a brief summary of the interaction. Not for a lawsuit, not for a complaint as a typical passenger, but as the incoming FAA director. These were data points. Evidence of a potential systemic issue within this airline's culture if Karen's behavior was tolerated or worse, emblematic. A little later, the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing that they were expecting some moderate turbulence over the Rockies. He advised passengers to return to their seats and ensure their seat belts were fastened. As the plane began to buck and sway, most passengers quickly complied. However, the businessman in 3C, who had several spreadsheets open and was on a muted video call, seemed reluctant to put his laptop away. Karen, instead of politely but firmly insisting, seemed almost flustered. "Sir, you really need to stow that." "Sir." He waved a dismissive hand. "Just a minute, almost done." The turbulence intensified. Drinks sloshed. Overhead bins creaked. David was quickly and efficiently moving through the cabin, checking seat belts, his voice calm and reassuring. Karen, however, seemed more focused on glaring at the businessman's still open laptop than on the overall cabin safety. "Sir, it's for your own safety and the safety of others." Her voice was rising, bordering on shrill. Suddenly, a particularly sharp jolt rocked the aircraft. An unlatched galley cart, which Karen had apparently not secured properly after the meal service, chose that exact moment to roll a few inches out, its contents rattling ominously. It wasn't a major safety breach, not yet, but it was a clear sign of inattention. David, seeing it from the other end of the first-class cabin, quickly moved to secure it, his expression tight with concern. He shot a quick, worried glance at Karen, who was still arguing with the businessman. Evelyn watched the exchange, her mind automatically assessing the situation. Crew coordination, adherence to safety protocols during turbulence, professional demeanor under pressure. Karen was failing on multiple fronts, too distracted by a minor infraction. The laptop, while a more significant one, the unsecured cart. Her own escalating tone was unfolding. The businessman finally unnerved by the jolt, and David's swift action with the cart slammed his laptop shut and shoved it into his bag. All right, heavens." Karen, seeming to finally notice the secured cart and David's disapproving look, flushed. She mumbled something about passengers not listening and hurried back to her jump seat, her composure visibly frayed. Evelyn made another mental note. This wasn't just about prejudice now, it was about competence, and Karen was displaying a concerning lack of it. The turbulence eventually subsided. The seatbelt sign was switched off, but the atmosphere in the first-class cabin remained tense. Karen avoided Evelyn's side of the aisle almost entirely for the next hour, leaving David to handle most of the passenger interactions there. He did so with a quiet efficiency and politeness that was a welcome relief. Evelyn, looking out at the majestic snow-capped peaks of the Rockies below, felt a sense of resolve hardening within her. Her trip to San Francisco had a clear agenda, but a new urgent item had just been added, addressing the culture within Aerowing Airlines. Because what she was experiencing was not just a personal affront. It was a symptom of a potentially larger problem, one that could, under the wrong circumstances, have far more serious consequences than a ruined first-class experience or a poorly handled moment of turbulence. The flight was still hours from its destination, but for Evelyn Hayes, the investigation had already begun. And for Karen, the flight attendant who judged a book by its cover, the final chapters were yet to be written with a karmic twist she could never have anticipated. The new FAA director was taking notes, and the bill for this flight was going to be far higher than the price of a first-class ticket. The relative calm after the turbulence was short-lived. Karen, it seemed, had stewed in her resentment and perceived slight. Instead of backing down, she appeared to have decided that Dr. Evelyn Hayes was not just a suspicious passenger, but a problematic one who needed to be managed, perhaps even officially reported. She began to make a show of documenting things on a small notepad she produced from her apron pocket. Her glances towards Evelyn, now accompanied by ostentatious scribbling. It was a petty, unprofessional display, clearly designed to intimidate or provoke. Evelyn, however, simply continued her work. Her outward demeanor, one of serene focus, though internally, she was meticulously cataloguing Karen's escalating campaign of harassment. About an hour out of Denver, as they soared over the vast, arid landscapes of Nevada, a call button chimed from seat 4A. An elderly gentleman, Mr. Thompson, who had been quiet for most of the flight, was looking pale and clutching his chest. His wife, frantic, pressed the call button repeatedly. David was there in an instant. "Sir, are you all right? What's happening?" "It's his heart," Mrs. Thompson cried, her voice trembling. "He has a condition. I think he needs a doctor." Karen arrived a moment later, her expression initially one of annoyance at the commotion. When she saw the situation, a flicker of something, panic, incompetence, crossed her face before she masked it with a strained professionalism. "What's the trouble here?" she asked, her voice a little too loud. "My husband. He's having chest pains," Mrs. Thompson explained, tears welling. "We need to page for a doctor on board." "Immediately," David said, already reaching for the interphone to contact the cockpit and request an announcement. "And get the emergency medical kit." "I'll handle the announcement," Karen snapped, cutting David off. "You get the kit, and try to keep them calm." She seemed more concerned with asserting her authority than with the urgency of the situation. Evelyn, overhearing everything, unbuckled her seatbelt. Her pre-FAA career had involved significant crisis management training, and while she wasn't a medical doctor, she knew basic emergency response protocols. She watched Karen fumbling slightly with the interphone, her instructions to the cockpit sounding rushed and less clear than they should have been. The announcement for a medical professional went out. Meanwhile, David returned with the primary medical kit, his face a mask of concern. Mr. Thompson was now sweating profusely, his breathing shallow. "Is there an AED in this kit?" Evelyn asked quietly but clearly, addressing David as she moved to the edge of her seat, ready to assist if needed. She knew from her FAA induction briefings that specific emergency equipment was mandatory. David nodded, his eyes grateful for the calm question. "Yes, ma'am, right here." Karen, having finished the announcement, turned back, her eyes narrowing as she saw Evelyn out of her seat and speaking to David. "Passenger, please return to your seat." "We have this under control. My husband needs oxygen," Mrs. Thompson pleaded. Karen looked flustered. "The oxygen masks are for decompression events. We need to assess. There should be a portable oxygen bottle in the supplementary kit for medical emergencies." Evelyn stated, her voice firm, but not aggressive. She wasn't trying to usurp Karen, but the flight attendant's hesitation was alarming. Seconds counted. "I know what's in the kit," Karen retorted, her face flushing. "I am a trained professional." She then proceeded to rummage through the main kit, seemingly overlooking the smaller, clearly marked oxygen cylinder that David was already discreetly pulling out from a side compartment, prompted by Evelyn's comment. Thankfully, at that moment, a woman from the economy cabin, an ER nurse, arrived. She quickly took charge, her movements efficient and practiced. David assisted her, capably providing the oxygen and helping to attach the leads for the AED just in case. Karen hovered, offering unhelpful suggestions and getting in the way, her earlier bravado deflating into a mixture of resentment and anxiety. Evelyn watched the ER nurse and David work. The nurse was calm, asking Mr. Thompson targeted questions, checking his pulse and reassuring Mrs. Thompson. David, following the nurse's lead, was a model of quiet competence. Karen, on the other hand, wrung her hands, and at one point, during a critical moment when the nurse was listening to Mr. Thompson's breathing, loudly asked if he'd eaten the chicken or the pasta, as if his meal choice was a contributing factor. The nurse shot Karen a look of pure disbelief. Evelyn made a more detailed note. Incident passenger medical emergency seat, 4A. FA. Karen, last name, if visible/obtainable later, displayed significant hesitation, lack of procedural knowledge, reportable oxygen, and unprofessional conduct. Interfered with assisting medical personnel. F.A. David, last name, acted appropriately and efficiently. The captain, having been appraised of the situation, came on the intercom to announce they were diverting to Reno Tahoe International Airport as a precaution. Mr. Thompson, while stabilized by the nurse and receiving oxygen, clearly needed immediate hospital attention. During the descent into Reno, Karen's demeanor towards Evelyn shifted from outright hostility to a sullen, resentful avoidance. She seemed to sense, perhaps, that her mishandling of the medical emergency had been noted not just by Evelyn, but by other passengers, and certainly by David and the ER nurse. Her earlier confidence was visibly shaken. As they landed in Reno, paramedics were waiting at the gate. Mr. Thompson was carefully taken off the aircraft, his wife accompanying him. Her face etched with worry, but also gratitude towards the ER nurse and David. The delay in Reno was just over an hour as the aircraft was refueled and paperwork completed. During this time, Karen mostly stayed in the galley, emerging only when necessary. Evelyn used the opportunity to stretch her legs and spoke briefly with David near the forward galley. "You handled that very well, David," Evelyn said quietly. "You and the nurse. You were both very professional." David looked surprised, then grateful. "Thank you, Ma'am. I'm glad she was on board. And thank you for your suggestion about the oxygen." Karen was a bit flustered. He lowered his voice. "She's been a bit on edge this whole flight, to be honest." Evelyn nodded. "I noticed." She paused, then asked, "Is it common for crew to be unsure about the location or use of emergency medical equipment?" David hesitated. "We have recurrent training, of course. But, some pay more attention than others, and real-life situations are different. Karen's been flying a long time. Sometimes I think she relies more on seniority than on recent refreshers." Another note for the file, Evelyn thought. Training compliance and recurrent knowledge retention. Before they reboarded for the final short leg to San Francisco, Karen approached the captain who had briefly come into the cabin. Evelyn couldn't hear the specifics of their hushed, urgent conversation near the cockpit door, but Karen was gesturing animatedly, occasionally glancing towards Evelyn. The captain listened, his expression unreadable, then nodded curtly and disappeared back into the cockpit. Karen returned to the cabin with a renewed, if brittle, air of authority. She seemed to have convinced herself of something, perhaps that the captain had validated her concerns, or that Evelyn was indeed a troublemaker she needed to watch. As passengers resettled, Karen made a point of walking slowly past Evelyn's seat, her eyes lingering. "We will be continuing to San Francisco shortly," she announced to the cabin, but her gaze was fixed on Evelyn. "We expect all passengers to remain compliant with crew instructions for the remainder of this flight. Any disruptive behavior will be reported." The implication was clear. In Karen's mind, Evelyn was the source of disruption, not her own incompetence or prejudice. Evelyn met her gaze, her expression unreadable. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Karen was digging her own professional grave, and Evelyn Hayes was merely observing the excavation, meticulously documenting every shovelful of dirt. The short flight from Reno to San Francisco was largely uneventful on the surface, but the tension in the first-class cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Karen patrolled the aisle like a sentinel, her focus almost entirely on Evelyn, who continued to work on her laptop, seemingly oblivious. Other passengers exchanged uneasy glances. The woman in 2D, who had witnessed much of Karen's behavior, gave Evelyn another small, encouraging nod when Karen wasn't looking. As they began their final descent into San Francisco International SFO, the city lights twinkling into view through the dissipating coastal fog. Evelyn closed her laptop. She took a moment to look out of the window, a sense of anticipation building. Not just for her meetings, but for the conversation she intended to have with Aerowing Airlines' corporate office, and perhaps, if necessary, with their CEO. Karen's voice came over the PA system reciting the arrival procedures with forced cheerfulness. On behalf of Aerowing and this entire crew, we'd like to thank you for flying with us today. We hope you had a pleasant journey. Evelyn almost smiled. Pleasant was hardly the word she'd choose. Instructive, perhaps, or concerning. As the plane taxied to the gate, Evelyn gathered her belongings. She noticed Karen speaking animatedly into the interphone, again her eyes darting towards Evelyn. It seemed Karen was determined to have the last word, perhaps arranging for ground staff or security to meet Evelyn based on whatever fabricated report she was concocting. Evelyn felt a flicker of amusement. Let her, she thought. Let her escalate this as much as she wants. The new director of the FAA was about to land, and for Karen, the flight attendant who judged a passenger by her skin color and her seat assignment, the real turbulence was just about to begin. The karma meticulously documented and patiently awaited was preparing for its own arrival. The jet bridge connected to the Aerowing A321neo with a gentle bump, the sound muffled within the cabin. The fasten seatbelt sign pinged off. There was the usual rustle of passengers gathering their belongings, eager to disembark after the unexpectedly eventful flight. Evelyn Hayes remained seated for a moment, calmly placing her laptop and notepad back into her leather briefcase, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Karen, meanwhile, was a hive of agitated activity. She stood near the forward exit, ostensibly to bid passengers farewell, but her eyes kept darting towards Evelyn. She spoke again into the interphone, her voice low and urgent, then hung it up with a decisive click, a thin, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She clearly believed she had orchestrated a fitting reception for the passenger she deemed a troublemaker. As Evelyn rose and joined the queue of deplaning first-class passengers, Karen positioned herself directly in her path at the doorway. David stood a little behind her, his expression apprehensive as he offered polite goodbyes to the departing travelers. When Evelyn reached the exit, Karen blocked her way, her smile now gone, replaced by a look of stern official seriousness. "Ma'am, if you could just step aside for a moment, please. We need to have a word with you." Evelyn paused, her eyebrows slightly raised. "Oh, is there a problem, Karen?" Her use of the flight attendant's first name was cool and direct. "We've had some concerns raised during this flight," Karen said, her voice loud enough for the remaining passengers and the gate agent now visible at the end of the jet bridge to hear. "Airline security would like to ask you a few questions." The woman from seat 2D, who was just ahead of Evelyn, turned with a look of shocked disapproval. "Concerns? She wasn't the one causing concerns. Flight attendant, your behavior was appalling." Karen ignored her, her focus entirely on Evelyn. "Please, ma'am, step aside." Two uniformed Aerowing ground staff members, a stern-faced man and a younger woman, were now waiting just inside the terminal at the end of the jet bridge, clearly summoned by Karen. Evelyn looked from Karen to the ground staff, then back to Karen. Her expression was calm, almost serene. "Very well," she said, her voice even. "If Aerowing feels it's necessary to question me, I'm happy to cooperate." "Where would you like me to go?" A smirk touched Karen's lips. She clearly felt vindicated. "They'll escort you," she said, gesturing towards the ground crew. Evelyn stepped onto the jet bridge. As she approached the two Aerowing employees, the male agent whose name tag read G Henderson, duty manager, stepped forward. "Ma'am?" He began, his tone officious. "We've received a report from the senior flight attendant regarding some irregularities and potential security concerns during your flight. We'll need you to come with us to the station office to clarify a few things." Evelyn met his gaze directly. "A report from flight attendant Karen, is it? Concerning what precisely?" She mentioned disruptive behavior, questioning crew instructions, and suspicious activity. Henderson said, consulting a small notepad. He seemed uncomfortable, as if the accusations didn't quite fit the poised woman standing before him. Evelyn nodded slowly. "I see. Well, Mr. Henderson, before we go anywhere, perhaps I should clarify a few things for you." She reached into her briefcase, not for her passport or driver's license, but for a slim, official-looking leather wallet. She flipped it open to reveal a gold badge and a photographic identification card. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Hayes." She stated, her voice quiet, but carrying unmistakable authority. "And as of 3 days ago, I am the acting director of the Federal Aviation Administration. My public announcement is scheduled for Wednesday. I am in San Francisco for official FAA business." The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. G. Henderson's jaw literally dropped. His eyes bulged as he stared at the credentials, then at Evelyn's face, then back at the credentials. The color drained from his own face. The younger female agent beside him gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Karen, who had followed Evelyn onto the jet bridge to oversee her detainment, had frozen mid-stride. Her smug expression dissolved into a mask of utter disbelief, then dawning, sickening horror. Her mouth opened and closed silently like a fish out of water. "FAA." Director Henderson stammered, his voice suddenly several octaves higher, but there was no notification, no special arrangements. High-ranking government officials, especially of cabinet or near cabinet level, often had discreet security protocols or liaisons when traveling even privately. "I was traveling incognito for this leg," Mr. Henderson, Evelyn explained calmly, tucking her credentials away. "I find it's often illuminating to experience the services of our nation's airlines as any other passenger would. And this flight on Aerowing 372 has been exceptionally illuminating." Her gaze flicked meaningfully towards Karen, who now looked like she might faint. Karen's face had gone from pale to a mottled red, then back to a ghostly white. She was trembling. She ordered champagne." Karen blurted out the accusation, now sounding utterly ridiculous even to her own ears. It was the desperate grasping of a drowning woman. Evelyn's lips curved into a cool, almost pitying smile. "Indeed I did. First-class passengers are generally permitted to order champagne." "Are they not? Or is that also considered suspicious activity when a black woman does so, Karen?" The duty manager, Henderson, was now sweating profusely. He looked from Evelyn to Karen, a horrified understanding dawning on him. "Oh dear God," he muttered under his breath. He fumbled for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Henderson at B-27. Patch me through to Station Director McMahon immediately. Urgent code. Code red. No code. Just get him on the line, now." He turned back to Evelyn, his voice full of a panicked deference. "Director Hayes, I am so profoundly sorry. There has clearly been a terrible misunderstanding, a grotesque error in judgment on the part of our crew member. His glare at Karen was murderous. Please come with me to our VIP lounge, or wherever you need to go. We will arrange immediate transport, whatever you need." "What I need, Mr. Henderson," Evelyn said, her voice still calm, but with an undeniable edge of steel, "is for you to understand the gravity of what has occurred on this flight. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a display of prejudice, unprofessionalism, and frankly incompetence that I found deeply disturbing both as a passenger and as the incoming head of the agency that oversees your airline's safety and operational standards." Karen let out a small, choked sob. I didn't know. I just thought. You thought I didn't belong in first class." Evelyn finished for her, her gaze unwavering. "You thought my presence was suspicious. You thought you could harass and intimidate a passenger with impunity. You made a lot of assumptions, Karen, all of them wrong, and all of them, I assure you, thoroughly documented." She tapped her briefcase. The younger female agent who had been with Henderson looked like she wanted the earth to swallow her. David, who had witnessed the exchange from the aircraft doorway, looked both horrified for Karen and perhaps a little vindicated in his own discomfort with her earlier behavior. He quickly and quietly disappeared back into the galley, likely to inform the captain of the cataclysm unfolding on the jet bridge. Within minutes, a harried-looking man in a more expensive suit, clearly a senior manager, Station Director McMahon himself, arrived breathless and pale. He'd obviously been sprinted from his office. "Director Hayes," he exclaimed, rushing forward, hand outstretched, though Evelyn did not immediately take it. "I am Daniel McMahon, Aero Wing SFO Station Director. I just heard. I am beyond mortified. Apologies are not enough. Please tell me what we can do to rectify this egregious situation." Evelyn finally looked away from the crumbling Karen and addressed McMahon. McMahon. "What I expect is a full and thorough investigation into the conduct of flight attendant Karen." "What is your last name?" "Karen." Karen, barely able to speak, whispered. "Miller. No, that's the captain. It's Jensen. Karen Jensen, flight attendant. Karen Jensen." Evelyn continued, and into the training and oversight protocols at Aero Wing that allowed such behavior to occur and to escalate. I experienced a consistent pattern of profiling and microaggressions bordering on harassment from the moment I stepped onto your aircraft. Furthermore, during an in-flight medical emergency, Ms. Jensen displayed a concerning lack of preparedness and professionalism that could have had serious consequences. McMahon's face grew paler with each word. "Director Hayes, I assure you we take such allegations with the utmost seriousness. Ms. Jensen will be immediately removed from duty pending a full investigation. We will cooperate fully with any inquiries your office wishes to make." He shot another venomous look at Karen, who was now openly weeping. "I would expect nothing less," Evelyn said. "I will also be expecting a formal meeting with your CEO, Mr. Mark Olson, at his earliest convenience. I believe we have much to discuss regarding Aero Wing's commitment to passenger service non-discrimination and adherence to the highest professional standards." "Absolutely, Director. Absolutely. I'll contact his office immediately. He's based in Chicago, but I'm sure he'll fly out here or meet you in D.C. at your request." McMahon was practically bowing. Evelyn finally gave a curt nod. "My office will be in touch to schedule that. For now, Mr. McMahon, I have actual FAA business to attend to in your city." She looked at G. Henderson. "Perhaps you can now arrange that transport you mentioned. A simple unmarked sedan will suffice." "Of course, Director Hayes. Right away." "This way, please." Henderson, practically tripping over himself with eagerness to comply, gestured frantically down the concourse. As Evelyn began to walk away with the two managers, she paused and looked back one last time at Karen Jensen. The flight attendant was slumped against the wall of the jet bridge, her face buried in her hands, her body shaking with sobs. The gate agent and the younger female staff member were standing awkwardly nearby, unsure what to do. There was no triumph in Evelyn's expression, only a weary sort of sadness. This wasn't a victory. It was a necessary, unpleasant course correction. But the message needed to be sent not just to Karen Jensen, but to Aerowing and the entire industry. Prejudice at 30,000 feet or anywhere else in the aviation ecosystem would not be tolerated. Not on her watch. The new FAA director had arrived, and the tremors of her landing were already beginning to shake the foundations of Aerowing Airlines. The hard karma had begun its descent, swift and unyielding. The meeting between Dr. Evelyn Hayes and Mark Olson, CEO of Aerowing Airlines, took place 2 days later in a discreet conference room near FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C. Olson, a man in his 50s, with the usual polished corporate veneer now visibly strained and fatigued, had flown in from Chicago with a small legal and PR contingent. Dr. Hayes. Olson began, his voice low and ostensibly contrite. I don't know what to say beyond offering my deepest, most sincere apologies on behalf of everyone at Aerowing Airlines. What you experienced was unacceptable and goes against everything we claim to stand for. Evelyn sat opposite him, composed and formidable. Her chief counsel from the FAA was by her side. She listened to Olson's apology without interruption, her expression unreadable. Mr. Olson, she replied, when he finished, her voice even, but carrying an undeniable weight. Your apology is noted. However, I am more concerned with the concrete actions Aerowing will take to ensure that no passenger, regardless of race, gender, or any other factor, endures the kind of treatment I did. And equally important, how Aerowing will ensure the competence and professionalism of its flight crews, especially during emergency situations. She placed her leather briefcase on the table, but didn't open it. Her meticulous notes from Flight 372 had already been translated into an official internal FAA report. This incident was not merely the misconduct of a single individual, Mr. Olson, Evelyn continued. It exposed potential flaws in your recruitment, training, oversight, and corporate culture. Flight attendant Karen Jensen did not operate in a vacuum. Her attitude, while extreme, may be symptomatic of a larger problem. Olson nodded quickly. We understand, Director, and we are prepared to implement any and all FAA requirements. Immediately, flight attendant Karen Jensen was suspended without pay. Following an urgent internal investigation, which included your testimony, statements from other witnesses, including passengers and other crew members, and a review of Ms. Jensen's service record, which admittedly had some prior minor complaints that were not adequately addressed, we have terminated her employment. And her operating license? Evelyn asked pointedly. We will not contest any action the FAA deems appropriate regarding the revocation of Ms. Jensen's license based on the findings regarding her conduct and competence. Olson replied, seemingly prepared for this. That was the first, most direct strike of hard karma. Karen Jensen not only lost her job, but faced the loss of the career she had built, however flawed its foundation. News of the incident, despite Aerowing's attempts to contain it, eventually leaked to the media, initially through airline employee forums, and then picked up by larger news outlets. Karen Jensen's name, though perhaps slightly altered in initial reports, to avoid direct lawsuits before official announcements became synonymous with terrible service and prejudice in the industry. But Evelyn wasn't finished. Addressing the individual is necessary, but not sufficient, she said. I am requiring Aerowing to commission a comprehensive independent review of all customer service anti-discrimination and emergency procedures training programs. This revised program must be FAA approved and the results publicly reported. She looked Olsen directly in the eye. Furthermore, the FAA will conduct a special audit of Aerowing within the next 6 months, focusing on in-flight service standards and safety compliance. Any identified lapses will result in severe penalties, including the possibility of substantial fines and route curtailments if necessary. Olsen swallowed hard. These demands were even more significant than firing an employee. They struck at the airline's reputation, finances, and operations. We understand and will comply, Director, he said, his voice somewhat shaky. One more thing, Evelyn added. Flight attendant David Ramirez. Throughout the flight, he demonstrated professionalism, composure, and respect for passengers, including during the medical emergency. I expect Aerowing to recognize and reward such employees. They are the face the airline should project. Olsen seized on this. Absolutely, Director. We have noted Mr. Ramirez's actions. He will be commended, and we are looking into promotion opportunities for him. This was a small ray of light in Aerowing's dark picture, and proof that right action would be rewarded. The meeting concluded with a series of firm commitments from Aerowing. Mark Olsen departed looking grim, but also somewhat relieved to at least have a clear, albeit challenging, path forward. In the weeks and months that followed, Aerowing Airlines underwent a painful overhaul. They hired an independent consulting firm to redesign their entire training curriculum to new FAA-mandated standards, focusing on identifying and combating implicit bias, enhancing cross-cultural communication skills, and reinforcing knowledge of safety and emergency medical procedures, bringing some elements up to par with courses like Advanced Cardiovascular Life Support, ACLS, for lead flight attendants. Mandatory workshops were held for all employees, from top management down to ground staff. The airline also issued a public apology across major media outlets, admitting its service failures and pledging to improve. While initially causing a short-term PR crisis, this transparency, coupled with the substantive changes that followed, gradually helped Aerowing regain some public trust. Their stock dipped, but long-term investors saw an opportunity in the restructuring and the chance to build a stronger brand based on respect and safety. As for Karen Jensen, her life changed completely. After her termination and the FAA's official revocation of her flight attendant license, she found herself in dire straits. Attempts to find new employment in the service industry failed as her story, even if not explicitly naming her in major mainstream channels, became a whispered case study within the sector. She became a ghost, a cautionary tale for those who let prejudice cloud professionalism. It was a steep price for her thoughtless and malicious actions. Dr. Evelyn Hayes, meanwhile, did not let the Aerowing incident remain an isolated event. She used it as a springboard to launch an industry-wide initiative. Within 3 months of taking office, the FAA, under her leadership, announced the Equitable and Safe Skies Initiative, ESSI. This program included new guidelines and stricter requirements for airlines regarding anti-discrimination training mechanisms for reporting and addressing passenger complaints related to bias and increased unannounced inspections, focusing on service quality and adherence to safety protocols. She also established a task force comprising experts from various fields, aviation, civil rights law, psychology, to study and make long-term recommendations for fostering a truly inclusive and respectful aviation culture. Evelyn's message was clear: the skies had to be safe and welcoming for everyone. Discrimination, whether subtle or overt, was not just an ethical issue, but a potential safety hazard, as it eroded trust, created unnecessary stress, and could distract crew members from their primary duties. The fateful Aerowing Flight 372 had dramatically launched Dr. Evelyn Hayes' tenure. But from that negative experience, she forged positive, far-reaching change. She was not just a passenger who had been wronged. She became a voice for millions of others, a powerful guardian of the right to fair and respectful treatment at 30,000 feet and on the ground. The skies under her watch promised to be clearer, and not just literally. And that was the greatest, most meaningful karma of all. Not personal retribution, but the transformation of an entire system for the better. Evelyn Hayes. The black woman, once deemed suspicious for flying first class, was now shaping the future of American aviation, ensuring every journey began and ended with dignity and safety. From a scrutinized first-class seat to the pinnacle of aviation authority, Dr. Evelyn Hayes' story is a stark reminder. Prejudice can lurk anywhere, but justice and truth can ultimately prevail. One flight attendant's actions didn't just destroy her own career. They exposed systemic issues, leading to sweeping changes. Never judge a book by its cover, for you don't know who they are or the power they wield. If you found this story compelling and meaningful, hit that like button, share this video to spread the message, and don't forget to subscribe for more dramatic and inspiring true stories. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.